back. Hour number 2 of Spooky Southcoast. Tim Weisberg, along with Stephanie Burke, science advisor Matt Moniz, and the silent assassin himself, Matt Costa, over there in the corner. I have to keep moving the monitor to see you, but I know I can picture you in my mind, but I like to actually see you, so that's why I move it back and forth.
He just needs to slide a little bit over to his right, and then we can all see him.
Right.
What we need to do is we need to redesign the studio solely with Spooky Southcoast in mind. We'll have to talk to Frank about that.
Weren't they supposed to put a new studio?
Eventually. Let's not talk about things like that. All
So
right.
does that mean we're going to get a chocolate fountain?
No, I'd be happy just to have a water fountain. Well, we have one of those, but that's about it.
Yeah.
We do have the free K-Cup coffee, but there hasn't been any cream for like 3 weeks.
Right. That thing takes forever. God.
I know. It's crazy. All right. Oh, I just found a button in my shorts. All right. Well, let's get back to the program instead of complaining about everyday life. Well, yeah. Welcome back to Complaining About Everyday Life with the Spooky Crew. Actually, we are joined now by our guest, Bob Olson. He is a former skeptic and a private investigator who has been researching evidence of life after death for the past 15 years. His expertise in this field led him to create bestpsychicmediums.com, bestpsychicdirectory.com, and afterlifetv.com. He also has a course for mediums at psychicmediumworkshop.com. His new book is Answers About the Afterlife. A private investigator's 15-year research unlocks the mysteries of life after death, and that is available now from Building Bridges Press, and he joins us on the program. Good evening, Bob. Thank you for joining us here on Spooky South Coast. How are you?
Good, Tim. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we're so honored to have you join us, especially when, our co-host here, Stephanie Burke, she has recently joined the program. We've known her for years, but she's only recently become a co-host over the last few months or so. And she was telling me from the time, even before she joined the program, she's like, you got to get Bob Olson on. You got to have him on. It'll change the way that everybody views psychics and mediums when they listen to them come on the show, and that it's part of the process of educating the audience about people with abilities. So we're glad that we could finally have you join us here on the show.
Fantastic, and thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate that. I was just reading her bio here, so she's impressive.
Oh, thank you. So are you.
She's one of the few psychic mediums that we would actually work with in that capacity ourselves, because like yourself, we've entered into this very skeptical about the process of it, and I think that you have to, because it is a field that is rife. I don't want to say it's just outright fraud for a lot of folks, but there are a lot of people who seem to think that they're gifted when they may not be.
Well, that's true. I've recognized that there are different levels of people with this ability. Some might seem like frauds, and really what it comes down to is they're just not very good at what they do. And there's 3 levels. You have a natural ability. Some people just seem to have a natural ability. Stephanie obviously does, because she had it since she was a child. And then you have training. Some people get proper training, and that really helps bring you to a new level. And then you have experience, people who have had years of experience. And when you have all 3 of those things, it really puts it together so you have a good medium. But there's many people who just are out there giving readings for a fee, and they shouldn't be. They don't have all 3 of those sometimes.
Well, and it is a situation where a lot of people go into this, go into the idea of having a reading not from the perspective that you and I may have of, let's take a look at this analytically. A lot of people are entering into this type of a situation because they're in some sort of an emotional or spiritual need, and they need to make that connection. They need to have that closure or get those answers. So they're not really entering into this necessarily under sound mind.
No, and they're the most vulnerable, of course, yeah, because there's a desperation involved, and they so want to believe, and so it's very easy, to take advantage of those people. And the people who are out there trying to take advantage of people, they know this, and that's who they're going after. Now, there's not as many as most people who are skeptical, even if they're open-minded. There's not as many out there as they might think, but they certainly do exist, and you got to watch out for them.
So your process actually started similarly, though. You needed to make your own connection. You were looking for your own answers from a spiritual point of view, but you were coming into this having already spent years as a private investigator and already having a skeptical and analytical mind.
Yeah, exactly. I live in Maine now, southern Maine, but I lived in the Massachusetts area, outside of Worcester in the town of Holden, and I was doing most of my investigations in the Boston area, and that's it. I was investigating fraud. I was investigating crime, including murder cases. I was investigating domestic cases where following spouses around that the other spouse thinks might be cheating on them, and I was doing all of it, and evidence was really important to me because the lawyers that I worked for, because they're the ones who hired me, they didn't want anything but evidence. They couldn't bring anything but evidence into court, and so that was the way I was trained, and that's the way my mind worked, even when it came to spirituality.
So you're having this this background and being somebody who has to fundamentally, not take people at their word, and it probably makes it very. You're probably seeing thinking just timeline wise at the time that you were involved in all this. You're probably seeing commercials with Miss Cleo on them, and all these Dionne Warwick infomercials, and what was your thought before you started really researching and investigating psychics and mediums? What was your general thought process on them?
Yeah, I didn't believe in any of that stuff, and I laughed when those commercials came on, and to this day, I won't specifically talk about any particular one, but I still have certain skepticism about some of those things, and we already know that a couple of them turned out to be fraudulent in one way or another, but there are psychic hotlines out there where there are legitimate psychics and mediums giving readings, but I still have issues with them even because the standards need to be raised. The expectations need to be raised, and we as a public can make that happen. So by not using a hotline where all the psychics are using fake names for one. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't hire a lawyer or a mechanic or an accountant that was using the name, Moonglow or something. And we shouldn't allow that with psychics and mediums. But it was sort of something that was allowed to happen for many years, and people continue with that tradition, and I don't know why.
Well, I know why. Some of them, their actual name is Moonglow. Like, it says it on their birth certificate.
You're right, actually. I do test a lot of psychics and mediums before I allow them on one of my sites, and some of them have some very interesting names, and I asked them to prove to me it was their name, and they changed it. They changed their name so it could be this kind of odd, weird one.
There was one that I met years ago. When I was younger, I was probably like in my early teens, and it was one of those. I was at a flea market actually, and the woman had a little booth at the flea market, and she had the turban and the crystal ball and the whole 9 yards. And I walked up to her and I said, well, what's your name? And she said, my name is Rosie Outlook.
Wow.
And I said, I think you're just going to tell me what I want to hear.
That's right, exactly.
But I thought that was a great name. If you're going to have a fake name,
you're right.
At least be positive about it.
I've heard some crazy ones. There was one that I thought couldn't be real. Her name was Molly Morningstar, and I was like, "Come on, Molly, really." And she's like, "No, my parents gave me that name. I figured they must be hippies or something, whatever it was. But they had the last name Star." And so they gave her the first name Molly, the middle name Morning, and her last name was Star. So, they had a good sense of humor.
Well, I mean, I guess you have to, in some degree, you have to sell yourself too. I mean, it's not just about having the ability necessarily; it's about having the ability to communicate that ability. So you have to have, I would assume, some degree of showmanship, or at least some degree of performance in being able to conduct a reading when you're somebody who is in the limelight for it. The one-on-one readings, like you might go to see Stephanie in her office, that's going to be obviously a little bit more personal and a little bit more connected and reserved. But if you're going out to see one of these, name people who are on television and draw a big crowd, they've got to have some degree of showmanship in what they do too.
Yeah, they really do. The entertainment factor is as important as being a good medium for what I call medium demonstrations, where they give readings randomly to people in the audience from stage. And the reason is because you'll lose the crowd out of boredom otherwise. And if you don't know how to control a crowd, in 2002 I gave an event. I put on an event where there were 5 mediums for the course of 5 hours, and I had, out of ignorance, I just had people that I knew had given me incredible private readings. And what I didn't realize was that only 3 of them were really good on stage, and the other 2 just lost people. In fact, both of them walked off of the stage, sort of got in the middle of the crowd, and I think it was because of their lack of confidence of being up there. And they went into the middle of the crowd to sort of get closer to people, and then you could just hear people all over, they're starting to talk. There was 400 people, and all of a sudden the whole place got louder because nobody was really paying attention anymore.
Every psychic, every medium, they'll probably have a different process, and not everyone's process would lend itself to being in front of that many people trying to make these connections. I've seen some of these psychics who go in front of the crowd and they want to perform and they want to wow people, but it's one or the other with them. They can either be on in terms of being a performer and being an entertainer, or they can be tuned in, and they have trouble finding the balance of both.
It does come from experience, Yeah, it's a great balance to learn, but it's something, you start off doing, for 20, 25 people, and then you work your way up to larger and larger audiences. And by the time you're into the hundreds, hopefully by that time you've really mastered the ability to give good readings in an entertaining way in front of this audience. And some of the best ones I've seen, they start off by giving a talk, which is very educational and helps people understand what's about to take place. And then they give the readings after that. And but again, what's interesting when you're at a medium demonstration, emotions are running high. There's a lot of people in the audience who are grieving. That's why they're there. They've lost someone. They want to make a connection. And even we'll see this at funerals or wakes. You hear it. Like I remember when I was a young child, I thought it was weird going to a wake and everybody was laughing. There was a lot of laughter in the room. And it's because emotions are just running high, and it has to, in a cathartic way, it has to go one way or the other. So you're either going to cry or you're going to laugh, but somehow it's going to come out. Mary Tyler Moore did a whole episode on it, I remember, where some clown died, and in the middle of the funeral, her and her friends all just started laughing, and they couldn't stop laughing, very inappropriately. But this is what happens, and so it's very easy, actually, for the mediums to create some humor, get people in a lighthearted mood, laughing at some things, but then at the same time, when it's a poignant situation, we'll say they're communicating with someone who took their life, they're able to get into that place and very seriously give that person the attention, and there's a lot of tears in the room.
I find your point of view extremely fascinating, only because coming from, I'm not even sure if it says it in my bio, but coming from the point that I did as a child, I hid my gift for so long because I just wanted to be normal. So coming out of the spirit closet, so to say, years later, I am a very analytical person. I was also a psychology major in college, so I love to see how things work, how things tick, and it was very difficult for me to go out there and to watch exactly how people conduct themselves and how they come about different things. And coming from those 3 different stages, like you mentioned, it's very interesting to watch from afar as well. So I find it extremely fascinating because I actually have never heard anybody speak about it like that, because that's how I feel about it too. So with that being said, what led you to actually start researching into psychics and mediums?
Okay. Well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you, and I really appreciate you saying that. It's nice feedback, and that all comes from my analytical mind,
Mm-hmm.
and having worked with mediums for 15 years now, and that's the way my mind works. I would just want to sort of test it for myself, experiment, see what is possible, what isn't possible, how far can we take this, and then compare hundreds of readings that I've had and analyze them to see why mediums do what they do and how it is that happens. The reason it started was my father died. I was in my mid-30s, He was 64 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if he went somewhere. I wondered if there was life after death. And I had lost other loved ones before him, and I hadn't really thought about it, but for some reason with him, maybe because of my age, I now had that question in my mind. I didn't know if there was life after death, but I knew that it was worth sort of looking into. And I figured with my skills as a private eye, who better, to investigate and find out if there really is something. Find out where if my father went anywhere, where did he go, what was that place like, etc. Well, honestly, for almost 2 years, I didn't know where to look. I was a skeptic, so as a skeptic, I wasn't educated about where to look for evidence of life after death. And I was going to psychics and tarot readers and astrologers, and that's not the place to search for evidence of life after death.
Mm-hmm.
And because my skepticism was so high, I thought every one of them to be a phony, fraud, or a scam artist. In hindsight, I recognize I probably had some really good readings from them, but I wasn't able to see them as such because I was only focused on the vague messages that they were giving me. Finally, someone told me about this person that they went to who was a medium. I had never heard of a medium before. In the late 90s, mediums were not as popular as they are
Right.
today. And I heard about this reading with all the evidence that came through, names and dates and memories that this person couldn't possibly know. And I said, I got to have that experience. And I went and had this reading, and the person was new at doing it for a fee. I was her first professional reading, and it was going so well for her. She didn't want it to stop. I didn't want it to stop, and it ended up going on for 3 hours.
Wow.
So my first reading was a 3-hour reading with all kinds of amazing, extraordinary evidence that came through that brought me to a whole new level, just cracked wide open my skepticism and made me realize there's more to life and death than I was aware of at that time. And that's what got me started with mediums. And from there, I just tested that particular medium, and then as I met others, I would test them in all sorts of different ways to see what was possible, analyze those. And, I mean, it's been over 300. I stopped counting at 300.
Wow.
But that's how it all started.
Well, what is the process of putting a medium to the test? How exactly do you go about doing that?
Well, it's one of these things where, I was ignorant at the time. It was just like, well, I don't know. And so one of the things I did was we didn't know back then in the 90s. It seems so obvious now, but we didn't know that if a medium could give a reading on the phone. Most people would go in person, and they felt like that was the way it had to happen. Mm-hmm. Let's try it on the phone. Does it work on the phone? I had a friend who had a radio show. Let's try it on the radio, see if it works on the radio. And then once we figured out we could do it by phone, then I was testing them on the radio. I would take out all my my murder cases, and I would put them on the table and see if the mediums could get the people who had been murdered to come through and tell us about the case, things that only me and a few other people knew about this case. This stranger, this stranger to the case, the medium, was telling me all kinds of things about the case they couldn't possibly know, and they were getting it from this person in spirit. And so, these are the kinds of things that would happen. And as time went on, and I gained more insight about what was possible and what wasn't, then my tests would sort of change along the way, and we'd get even more and more specific to see what was possible and what wasn't.
Do you find while you're testing mediums, because I've seen a lot of different mediums have a lot of different ways of reading and a lot of different abilities themselves, do you cater to their different abilities, or do you just kind of have one way of testing each one the same way?
No, eventually, the more I tested, the more I gained a grasp of recognizing what people's strengths and weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
were. And then it just became very natural for me. And so I was able to recognize those three things. For one, I would start there. I would be able to recognize, okay, they have a great natural ability, but they haven't had any training. I could even tell that in the reading. or they haven't had much experience. When I say experience, with experience comes feedback. That's
Right.
where the experience helps a psychic or a medium. You know, and when I say that, it's even better if it's, you know, you're charging for a reading, because you can give readings to your friends and family members all day long at parties, and nobody's going to complain. Nobody's going to say anything to you negatively for the most part. But you start charging people for it, and all of a sudden, if it's not a good reading, a lot of people are going to tell you. They're going to be asking for refunds and that, and it forces you to get better, because you don't want to live through that over and over again.
Absolutely.
So they'll let you know what you did wrong, and you'll try to fix it. And for the ones that aren't very good, a lot of times that is what gets them to go to someone who's more experienced to look for training. And then the training will bring a lot of people to a new level. Of course, training, the training's only going to be as good as the medium who's doing the training. So, there's a lot nowadays. So many mediums are like, oh, here's a great way to make some extra money. I'll take these beginners and I'll train them how to do it. Well, if that person has really bad habits, all they're doing is passing those on to other people, and I've seen that happen as well. But then as I would go on and as the years went on, I started to not just look at these things. I started to look at the delivery, the responsibility in how they delivered their messages. Did they deliver messages like, oh, you have cancer? Are they delivering that message? Because when a medium does something like that, what they don't recognize is that, mediums can be wrong. Now, the message might always be right. Technically we could say the message is always right that's coming from spirit, but it's the medium's interpretation
Absolutely.
of that message that can be wrong. And I've seen that a million times. A medium is one of the things I when I train them myself, I tell them, just tell us what you're getting. Don't give us your interpretation of it. There's this great story about this. I had this reading, and the medium kept saying, "You love, I'm getting that you love coffee. You love coffee." This was even before I drank a lot of coffee, and I was like, "No, that's not right." And then he keeps talking about this, and then finally, I'm like, "Well, what are you getting?" And he said, "They're just showing me coffee. They're just showing me coffee." Well, yeah. Now that I understand, because the person in spirit's cat was named Coffee. And so if you had just said they're telling me coffee, I would have gone, oh yeah, that's his cat. You know what I mean? But instead, he was telling me that I love coffee, and he was wrong. So what he was getting, the message was right. His interpretation of it was wrong. And so, over time, I got to sort of fine tune and really figure out what makes a good medium versus a beginner.
I have to say, I think you're my new favorite person.
Well,
I
thank you.
try to push these points that you're bringing up across constantly when people ask me questions, or they ask me to teach a class, or things like that. But I don't think anybody ever truly grasps that concept of, it is the interpretation, or it's even the customer or the client's interpretation too of different things. So you moved up to number one spot, I think.
Well, thank you. And I'll tell you
Sorry,
the one
Brendan.
thing, if you want to be, whether you're a psychic or a medium, if you want to have me give you one piece of advice, this is for anybody out there who's doing it, that will improve your ability, is to stop asking questions. Don't ask questions. The best psychics and mediums are the ones who will give you all kinds of information, and they just have to trust that it's coming from their intuitive ability, and that it's correct. And they give you all kinds of information before they even ask you for feedback. Because what happens is, as soon as they start to get feedback and they start to ask questions, then their intellect gets involved. Because that feedback now has kicked in their intellect, and now they're making intellectual decisions as well. But when they're just giving you the intuitive message, the message that's coming through their intuitive ability, it's all on trust. And then when they say, "Do you understand it?" they don't feed the medium, right? Don't give them any information. Just say whether you understand the message, yes, no, or maybe. And that's all any person, any client, any sitter who's getting a reading should do, is say yes, no, or maybe. Yes, I understand it. No, I don't understand it. I need more information. Or maybe. Why don't you just keep going? We'll see where you're going with this. But so many psychics and mediums ask questions, even when they're giving a statement. Like they might be I'm getting a nurse. They want me to say nurse. And that could mean a million things. The person in spirit was a nurse, you're a nurse, whatever. But what they say is, who's the nurse? Well, that's a leading question.
It is.
And it forces the sitter to then give them information, which is feeding them something, and they'll end up telling them something that now the medium can't tell that person, which could have been great evidence, which might have brought them from skepticism to belief. Just that one piece of evidence they've taken away from them because now the person has told the medium that. Does that make sense to you?
That is perfectly put.
Well, and you mentioned, beware of psychics who ask leading questions, and you actually have a handy guide for folks that are getting readings, 6 ways to get a good psychic medium, and that's number 1 on your list is, beware of psychics who ask a lot of questions. There are some other things that people need to take into concern if they are going to be going and getting a reading done.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, and a lot of people say, how can the general public, know whether they're going to a good psychic or medium or not? Honestly, you don't. There's really no way. There's no way someone can go from, because I was a beginner too. I didn't know the difference, but my first reading, even in hindsight, I say it was amazing. Well, yeah, 3 hours. If people had a 3-hour reading, a lot of evidence is probably going to come through. I can't tell you that was the best medium I ever went to. But that was my first one, and so I only knew it I only had experience with one. I could only compare it to that one. As I started to have more, I could compare them, and as time went on, I learned the difference between a good one and a bad one. Most people don't have that luxury. The best thing that you can do when you start off is just try to get a referral from someone you trust. It's one of the reasons that I do the work that I do, that I have the directory, bestsellerdirectory.com and stuff. But it's also I also say, if you've got a friend who you guys have a lot of things in common, you like the same books, you like the same movies, then if they went to someone who they really like, especially if they've been to the same medium a few times, then that's a great referral. That's a great way for you to get started, is to go to the one that they've had great success with, and much better than just sort of flipping through the phone book and choosing somebody. Well,
and it's really important, too, that if you are going to get a reading, and no matter what you take into account, a lot of folks probably, the question, especially the 6 points that you make for people to get a good reading, a lot of it you would think is common sense, like don't give out your personal identification to them, don't give them your social security number, things like that. A lot of these red flags, though, people might not be thinking when they're going into this because they're trying to have an automatic trust with this person. But one of the points that you make in this list, and I think is important for people to realize, that sometimes even psychics have bad days. Like even the most gifted, most brilliant psychic might have an off day and might have their own baggage that's weighing down a reading.
And this is why there aren't as many frauds out there as most people think. Because when someone goes to a medium, and this is very sad that this happens, but I also trust this is an experience that the person was supposed to have for whatever reason. When they go to a medium, and say it's their first experience, and they got it on a referral because this medium has given other people great readings, and they go there, and that medium was having a bad day. It's really sad, because what a lot of people will do is they'll say, that's it. Forget it. I'm never going to another medium. They're all a bunch of phonies. I just got taken. And what's interesting, I have a bestsellerdirectory.com. We got over 800 psychics and mediums listed there. People will email me because of an experience that they weren't happy about before they'll tell the psychic or medium. We're such a polite society that we're afraid to tell somebody that they weren't good, right? Mm-hmm. That our reading was less than satisfactory. And it's really important that you give that person that feedback, and particularly during the reading. Don't say, yes, I understand, if you don't understand. You want to immediately let them know if the reading's not going well. Sometimes that's how the only way they're going to find out that they're not having a good day. And so if you let them know nothing's making sense, you say it's an hour reading, it's been 15 minutes, certainly let them know, look, nothing really, for the most part, is making sense here, and maybe we should stop the reading and do it another day. And they're not going to charge you for that. Either, the ones with the greatest integrity will give you a refund, or they'll offer to do it another day.
Right. I mean, I was going to say the converse of that is that the medium, if they feel they're having that type of a day, should tell you and be like, listen, I'm not feeling it today, and I'm sorry. I can't just turn it on and off like that, and maybe we can do this another time, or there's no charge. But you never really get enough of that from a lot of these folks, because they see it as not so much their gift, but their time. Their time is money. And so they find, and that's how I think we get into a lot of situations where people are getting cold read, and when people are going into these readings and getting the most basic generic readings, is because the psychic, the medium, feels like they have to deliver something because they're charging for their time, and they feel like they have to at least come out with something. I would rather go into a reading and have a psychic or a medium say, nope, not getting anything, sorry, than to try and BS me for 20 minutes.
And but actually, I don't think it happens. I don't think it normally happens that way. What I was kind of saying a moment ago was they don't realize it's not going well if the person doesn't tell them. They're getting stuff in their head, and the way it works, Stephanie, she can tell you. You get stuff in your head, and you're kind of trusting that the stuff that you're getting in the head is for this person, and it's going to be valuable to them. And they'll just keep going because thoughts are entering their mind. And if it's not helpful, sometimes they could go for a complete hour giving this information to someone, know it's not helpful to them if the person doesn't tell them. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. The second thing is a lot of people will feed the medium, and that's where their intellect gets in the way. I don't think it's so much cold reading as I think it comes from inexperience, and I think the beginner psychics and mediums don't even realize how much they're cold reading, if anybody even understands that, but they're kind of letting their intellect draw some conclusions more than using their intuition. I think a lot of the beginners don't even realize how much they're allowing that to happen, and that's because they're beginners.
Well, you've mentioned training and experience quite frequently. Do you feel that this ability is inherent in all people, and that somebody could learn if they are trained by the right person and can develop this gift?
I can. I do believe that, and I'll say all the people that I've got readings from, I have had people who have been trained somewhat, didn't do a lot of training, and the teachers told me, the reason I ended up getting a reading from them was because their teachers told me this person is a prodigy. They're amazing. They have an amazing natural ability. But they didn't have a lot of experience, and their training, was brief. They didn't continue with their training. So what I'm trying to say is I have had people with amazing natural ability that didn't give me as good a reading as someone with not amazing, not necessarily a real natural ability, but had a desire to learn spirit communication as a medium. Went through a lot of training, a lot of experience. We have one of the things that's not as popular in this society that I think should be is what's called the medium circle. This is where a bunch of mediums get together, maybe 4 to 8 get together. They sit in a circle, and they just keep reading one another over time, always trying to get somebody new that they've never read before, so they don't know this information about the person. And this is one of the ways that they train. They train with each other rather than with other people. And a lot of times they can, more than one medium will get the same information, so they'll recognize, we're both getting that. They learn a lot by working with one another. This doesn't happen as commonly in this country as it does, say, in England. Very popular in England. But yeah, I found some people that I thought I could tell their natural ability wasn't really there, but they had worked so hard at training, and they had a lot of experience in giving readings in one way or another, that their readings that they gave me were much better than the people with natural ability. And some of that comes from structure. There is a proper structure that you should take, especially if you're a medium, that you should follow to make a reading good. The worst readings that I've had, regardless of ability, is when they're all over the place. This person in spirit's giving me this message, message. Oh, I'm getting another message from somebody else. I don't know who it is. Oh, now your aunt's coming through. And then half the time they're giving me messages and they don't know who it came from. And then sometimes they're switching from mediumship to psychic ability, and they're giving me psychic information. And they're, a lot of the stuff is accurate, but it's so random and so all over the place that it ends up, it's not helpful to me or anybody else, and it ends up being a lousy reading.
Well, you had mentioned a few times, of course, the Best Psychic Directory, which is the website that you've put together where not only have you given a certain amount, your stamp of approval, the ones that you've tested, but people can go on there and they can offer up their own reviews and opinions about that. Now, my question to you is that when you're putting that up there, how do you regulate that in a way of making sure that it's a rating for somebody who actually has had a reading from that psychic and not, some of this petty stuff where one might be disparaging another or somebody's friend is putting up a negative review of somebody else? How do you monitor those reviews and make sure that they're authentic?
Yeah, it took a lot of forethought to do that. I actually only put up positive reviews.
Okay. And
the reason is because I had enough experience. I didn't start the directory until 2007. I had enough experience where there's a reality to people are much quicker to complain than they are to write something positive about somebody. It's kind of like complaint letters. If you're a business, getting complaint letters versus somebody writing about one of your employees doing a great job. You're more likely to get the complaint letter. Well, this is true for psychics and mediums as well. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want this to be a place where there would be all this negative energy. What I wanted was, if somebody is really good, it's hard enough. It is hard to get someone to write something about you and actually put their name on it. On my site, you have to put your first and last name, and so what I wanted people to be able to do is, if they're trying to decide, say, between 2 or 3 mediums, and they see one has no reviews at all, and again, reviews would mean positive testimonials. Another one has 10, and another has 150. It's going to be pretty easy for you to make the decision as to which one you're going to go with. For someone to have 150 positive reviews is a really good sign. It's really difficult to get 150 people to say good things about you. Everybody can get their friends to do it. So if you get 10 or less, but if you start to get more than that, then you know that this is real people, general public out there who have found my site and are submitting these reviews for people because they had such a great reading they can't wait to tell other people about it.
I wish I had 150 friends that could write positive reviews for me. My Amazon book ratings would be a lot higher.
Yeah, exactly. See, there you go. That's a perfect example for it. Yeah, anybody who is an author recognize what I'm talking about.
So, but not only do you research psychics and mediums, but you also research people who have other such abilities, whether it be, past life regressions, people who can, maybe numerologists, people who work within the same type of realm, but maybe not are directly psychics or mediums.
Yeah, so what happened was, after a couple of years working with mediums, and then I went from mediums to sort of, all right, there's a lot of psychics here, let me learn about that ability as well. And so after a couple of years of that, I realized, I wanted more. I wanted more evidence of life after death. And I had heard about people having past life regressions, and it was something that I was still skeptical about. And that's the way it always works for me. Like what I call is I go from skepticism to belief to knowing. And we know what skepticism is. Belief is, it turns out, in my definition, belief is us having faith on what somebody else tells us, so that we can read a book or we can hear somebody's story. Or even, this is kind of where religion sits, because we have our religious leaders telling us this is what you should believe. And then, to get to a knowing, we have to have a personal experience. And so I was looking for another personal experience, because actually getting a reading with a medium is a personal experience. When you have a stranger telling you memories between your father in spirit and you that they couldn't possibly know, then that's a personal experience. You're actually having an emotional, visceral experience at that time. But I wanted another one, and so when you have a personal experience, that's what gets you to what I call a knowing. I didn't make up the word. A lot of people use that word knowing, but I learned learned early on that there's a difference between a belief and a knowing. And the only way to get to knowing is through personal experience. So I now recognize that people had said that they had these successful past life regressions, but I didn't really know if I believed in it. I thought at best, maybe they really did have an experience, but I didn't think it would work for me. So what do? You have to go out and test it for yourself. And I did, and I was actually surprised that the very first experience I had was an absolutely amazing experience. And it brought me to a knowing about past life regressions, which also taught me about past lives, which was all about the afterlife, because that's what I was trying to study. And I learned that, of course, if I really believed that this was a past life that I experienced, and when I say experience, it's more of a memory, but it's a multi-sensory memory where I could smell things, I could see things, I could even taste things, and I could feel what it felt like to be in the body of that guy in 1643. That also brought me to a knowing. But what's interesting about it when you have an experience like that is you recognize it becomes so sacred to you, and it becomes like what's the word? Like, so you know it at a soul level. You know it at like at the core of yourself that this was real. This wasn't something that you just imagined. And yet, what happens is it gets to the point where it doesn't even matter now if anybody else believes you or not. You're not trying to overcome anybody else's skepticism. It was always about your own. And this was a real pivotal point in my spiritual growth, was to have that experience. And it brought me to that place where I came to a knowing and recognized this is my truth. This is my knowing, and it doesn't matter if it's anybody else's. And mine is perfect, and yours is perfect, even if our truths are miles apart. And I do believe there's a universal truth, but I don't think that our brains are able to actually fathom the universal truth. And this is why people who have had near-death experiences will come back and say, I really can't explain what it was like there, but I'll do my best. I believe that, just like I was saying earlier with the mediums interpreting things, I think the human brain uses its own experiences and education and beliefs to interpret all the things that we experience on our own. And yet, this is why 5 people can experience the same thing, and they'll all tell you a little bit of different story. I learned this as a private investigator. I would investigate a car accident, investigate 5 different people, and they would all sort of tell me the same story. I know what happened during that accident, but they would tell it to me a little bit differently. The details from each person was a little bit different. And this is what happens when we have our spiritual experiences as well. Spirituality is subjective.
We are talking with Bob Olson. He is an afterlife investigator and psychic medium researcher. And I guess people go into a lot of these readings, though, and Stephanie, I'm sure you experienced it too as well. They go into there with, in some cases, a false idea of what they can expect to happen. They think that they're going to be able to walk in and ask their grandmother, where the hidden jewelry is. They're going to think that they're going to be able to go in there and find out if they are going to fall in love with who and when. What are the reasonable expectations that people should have when going to see a psychic or a medium?
Such a great question, Tim, because you're right. This is where a lot of people get disappointed. Their expectations are too high. What's reasonable to expect is that a good medium will be able to tell you basically the relationship. So is it your father? Sometimes they might just say it's a father figure, because sometimes we might have an uncle who sort of was a father figure to us, and they're sort of at that same level, so the medium might not recognize whether it's a father or an uncle. They'll say father figure. But in most cases, they'll know, especially the better mediums will say, okay, it's your father, it's your grandmother. And they'll tell us who it is. They'll usually be able to give us the first name. At the very least, they should be able to give you the first letter of the first name. And the reason is because Mike and Mark to a medium sounds very much the same. The way they're hearing it's kind of a bad radio station, and that's the way it's coming through. Now, they get messages in all sorts of different ways. So if they're clairaudient, then they're hearing it, and Mike and Mark might be very difficult for them to tell the difference. And they might tell you, I'm getting either Mike or Mark, or I'm getting a name that begins with M. Sometimes, though, if they see things, if they're clairvoyant, then they might see a picture of someone they know whose name is Mike, and then it'll be easy for them to just tell you what that person's name is. But first letter, first name, usually not both. I have seen some mediums be able to give you the first and last name. They'll be able to tell you what their physical appearance was like, what their personality was like. Sometimes they'll actually be able to talk in the vernacular that person talked with. My father was a truck driver, and the best mediums that I had readings with would be able to actually talk the way he talked, and I knew it was my father coming through. They'll be able to tell me things about his personality that everybody that knew him knew. Things that he did. My father was a smoker. Usually they could smell the smoke, and I'm smelling a lot of smoke. I don't know if he was a smoker. Oh yeah, that was him. And they'll usually be able to tell you how that person died. At the very least, they'll be able to say, I'm feeling a lot of congestion in my chest right now, so it's something in the chest, either lung cancer or maybe a heart problem. That's usually how things, if it was a car accident, they'll usually say, my head hurts. I'm feeling like maybe it was an impact to the head. So they might not say car accident. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, but they might say impact to the head. They might tell you when they're trying to get the career, they might say, he was a police officer, and if he was a security guard, you have to understand, it just, sometimes military-type uniform just looks the same to everybody.
Sure, not everybody knows what the particulars are. I mean, if somebody showed me, the insignia on their shoulder, I wouldn't know necessarily what it means myself.
It.
But you made me think of something when you were talking about being able to, speak in some of the vernacular of your father. What about those who channel? Is channeling a legitimate phenomenon?
Yeah, believe it or not, it's the same thing. This was a progression for me. It wasn't until years later that I really got into channels. Channeling is it is, but it's not very evidence-based. So it's not going to help you. If you're skeptical, I don't recommend that be one of the first experiences that you have, because where mediums are communicating with our loved ones in spirit, channels are usually communicating with more advanced type of spiritual beings that are only channeling information to transfer wisdom to us. A lot of times it'll be group entities. So it's not just one person in spirit, but it's a group of spirits. They have different names for them. It doesn't really matter. There's sort of these advanced spirits. They might call them ascended masters or something, but they're a group spirit. They might even call themselves by one name. Probably the most famous one out there is Abraham, but it's a group entity. And really what they're doing is they're teaching us higher wisdom, things that we can use in our life, but they're not going to give us really any evidence that we can look back and go, oh yeah, this is true, this is true, this is true. That anything we can verify, we sort of have to take what they're saying as truth. But when you hear it, there are always messages that come from a higher place, messages of love, messages of forgiveness, nothing that's a fearful message. If something's coming through fearful, then it's not accurate, because it always comes through in a positive light.
Well, this is just the tip of information that you can get in our guest Bob Olson's new book. It is entitled Answers About the Afterlife. A private investigator's 15-year research unlocks the mysteries of life after death. And, of course, he discusses it on his website, on spirit.com, on afterlifetv.com, and you can check it out for yourself. Definitely go to the sites. They're linked up on the front page of SpookySouthcoast.com as well. You can also get the book directly there as well from Amazon. Before we let you go, we only have a few minutes left here in the program, Bob, but I got to ask you. Yeah. Bob Olson needs some questions answered. He needs to reach out and make a communication with spirit, and he can go see one medium. Who does he go to see?
You know what? Here's what I'm going to say. I wouldn't even tell you that, because the one medium that I would go see is not the one medium that would be best for you. Personality, makes such a big difference in how the reading is given. So the person that I would like wouldn't necessarily be the person that you like, and I would be doing a disservice if I put out a certain name out there for everybody to go to.
Believe it or not, that was the answer I was hoping for.
Okay, good.
I wanted to make sure that we extend to people the idea that it is a personal connection, and no matter what happens when you go out and you see some of these other people get read in a group setting, in a gallery setting, it's all about who can make that personal connection with you.
That's right.
Same thing as going to see a doctor, going to see a psychologist, going to see a bartender. You know, sometimes you go to a certain bar just because the bartender listens well and has the advice that you need to hear. So that's what it's all about. Not that I want to compare you to a bartender, Stephanie, but
Well, I was one at one
that's
time. but
exactly why I don't want to do it.
I think I have one last question.
We have about a minute left. So.
I know you do. I'm watching the time. After all of this research, after coming up with your own training, which, you know, I'm reading your website, I think is fantastic, and having such a great grasp, have you ever tried to communicate with the other side yourself?
Yeah, I did. I was really horrible at it.
Really?
I did a psychic development workshop early on in my career, and in this field, and they hooked us up with other people. And I felt so bad because the guy that I teamed up with did a great job, and I actually got nothing. I just felt so guilty about it. But no, I'm terrible at it.
That's too funny.
Needless to say, we won't find your name under the reviewed psychics on bestpsychicsdirectory.com.
No, you wouldn't. Not at all.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for joining us. It was great talking with you, and hopefully you can join us again sometime for a complete 2-hour program.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Tim. Nice talking with you, Stephanie, and the two Matts
You
back
as well.
there. Thank you, too.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great night. Thank you again.
All right, you too. Bye-bye now.
And that is Bob Olson. Again, you can check out his website on spirit.com, also bestpsychicsdirectory.com, afterlifetv.com, and a few more. And the book, once again, is called Answers About the Afterlife. It's available from Amazon or wherever books are sold. That about does it for this week's show. We will be back next Saturday night when our guest will be Matt Frazier. He is a psychic and medium himself. We are talking about Psychic September here on Spooky Southcoast, so you want to stay tuned each week as we explore that world. We want to thank you all for listening, and follow us on Twitter @SpookySC. And until next week, we want you all to stay spooktacular.
For local news, talk, and sports, Southcoast turns to AM 1420 WB.